At 25 years old, there's a fair chance that the Dynasty Wars franchise has been on this footing blob for longer than some of you watching this video right now. Releasing in the very early 2000s on PS2, Dynasty Wars has become a name that pretty much every gamer knows, even if they don't actually play the games. This series has even practically created its own genre, known as MUSO, which now has many spin-offs and IP adaptations sitting alongside the main Dynasty Wars franchise. Sadly, however, while everyone knows of them, it's not always for the best reasons. The series to many people is seen as, if we're being honest, a bit of a joke. Many just see it as a simple button masher where you effortlessly mow through hordes of enemy troops, and on the surface level that's pretty much true. However, beneath that surface gameplay is hidden mechanical depth in the form of a real-time battle simulation that was frankly ahead of its time. So in this video, my goal is to shine a light on this oft overlooked aspect of the gameplay formula, as it's what hooked me on the franchise from those early days of the PS2 and impacted everyone's experience, even when people didn't pay any attention to it. So let's dive in. To be clear, I don't blame anyone for not noticing or paying much attention to the battle simulation aspect of Dynasty Warriors, because it has always played second fiddle to the dominant hack and slash portion of the gameplay. Most players did know that there was a morale system, as it was clearly displayed on the screen, but that's where the knowledge ended for many. Many people didn't pay much attention to how it really worked, and I can't blame them for that because, simply put, you didn't need to know. You could blast through the game caring about absolutely nothing other than how many enemy soldiers were getting zapped by your sword, which was a double-edged blade, because on one side it meant the games were easy to pick up and play, but on the other side it meant that the devs had developed an interesting battle sim element that went largely without praise or even recognition, despite always being a factor driving the player's experience beneath the hood. So how did it really work? The battle simulation is really a collection of smaller mechanics that interconnect and affect each other, adding up to create the overall battle simulation experience. Note that the following is talking about the franchise as a whole, but with a particular focus on 3, 4 and 5, not any individual title. Some of these systems were simplified or even outright removed as the series went on, especially in Dynasty Wars 7 and 8, but I'll touch on this later in the video. So for now, just bear in mind that this is a general summary of what appeared throughout the series as a whole, but with a focus on the PS2 era titles when the simulation aspect was at its strongest. As mentioned earlier, the games have a morale system that most people were aware of, but the morale system itself was affected by multiple factors, so let's break it down. 1. Officers have an individual morale rating that we can see here represented by a number of stars. This affected their own, their lieutenants, and their troops' off-screen battle performance. 2. Officers have a chance of getting a morale boost each time they, or their lieutenants, get 50 KOs. I say chance because there's a random factor, so the morale boost doesn't always happen. There seems to be an internal coin flip to see if the boost actually happens or not. So let's have a look at this in action. As we can see here, Xiao Yun has 5-star morale, and I'm playing as Guan Yu, a lieutenant officer under his command. In this instance, when Guan Yu gets 50 KOs, as we can see when we look back at the morale rating, Xiao Yun is still at 5 stars. But in this second instance, on the same stage with a fresh start, this time when Guan Yu gets 50 KOs, we can see that Xiao Yun's morale has risen to 6-star morale. And just for clarity, it doesn't need to be the player getting the KOs. In this example, the AI ally officer Ma Chao has achieved 50 KOs somewhere else on the battlefield, and we see the message about his morale rising. 3. Officers could get a morale boost when they, or their lieutenants, defeat an enemy officer. And just like with the KOs, there's a random factor which decides if the morale boost happens or not. Again, let's have a look at this in action. As we can see here, the ally officer Zhang Fei has 3-star morale, and he's currently locked in a battle with a Nanman officer. However, after clobbering him with style, as we can see in the menu, he didn't get the morale boost. However, on a repeat of the same stage, again Zhang Fei has 3-star morale and is fighting the same enemy officer. This time we can see the morale rise to 4 stars after his victory. Four. Officers could lose morale by losing troops or lieutenants under their command. In this clip we can see the enemy officer and his troops have 4-star morale, and after a number of them get defeated, we can see the officer's morale rating drops to 3 stars. And the same goes for when a lieutenant is defeated. There's a chance that the lead officer's morale will drop. We can see in this battle Wen Chu has 3-star morale, and when his lieutenant Gao Lan is defeated, it drops to 2-star morale. Five. There is a small random factor to the starting morale of enemy officers when a stage begins. It could be a star higher or lower, leading to knock-on effects on the battlefield. As we see here, Meng Huo has 5-star morale at the start of the stage. But on another go at the same stage, he starts with 4-star morale. This one in particular was a battle sim element that a lot of players missed, which isn't surprising since you'd only notice it if you were paying really close attention to the exact starting morale ratings for the officers when playing a stage multiple times. 6. Contrary to what some think, morale only affects the off-screen battle performance of allies and enemies. It didn't affect their on-screen performance until courage was introduced in Origins, but that's technically separate from morale. All of that was just specifically for the morale system, and the morale system is just one aspect of the overall battle simulation. Other notable aspects include 1. Officers have other officers fighting under their command, known as lieutenants. This opened up tactical battlefield choices. As already shown, defeating the lieutenants could reduce the morale of their commanding officer, or, as we see here with Officer Wen Chu and Lieutenant Gao Lan, going straight for the lead officer and defeating them causes the lieutenants under their command to actually retreat from the battlefield through a checkpoint. Two. Each officer has a finite troop count under their command, as we see represented here with the green bar. These troop reinforcements would enter via checkpoints, and they could eventually run out of troops if the battle dragged on for long enough. 3. These troop checkpoints could be captured and sealed off, denying the enemy troop reinforcements in that area of the battlefield. 4. The battlefields have bases in some games, with their functions varying depending on the title. For example, in Dynasty Warriors 5, there's offensive bases, which are open, attack with siege weapons, and have fast dual-wielding troops.
This isn't going so well. They will not get past us so easily.
There's defensive bases, which have unique shield-wielding troops.
Now lead the attack even further from that base. Good luck if you think you can break through our defenses.
And there's supply bases, which can heal and buff nearby troops.
Show no mercy. They're trying to take the base. Stop them. They're trying to take the base. Stop them.
And just like how the morale system has a random factor, these bases can have a random factor depending on the stage. As we see here, it's the same stage being played twice, but the bases present in the circled spots are different. These various random factors all add up to create a little bit of gameplay variation each time you play, so the stages don't always play out exactly the same. 5. Troop ranks mattered in the older games. There was a noticeable difference in the battle performance between low and high ranking troops, with the 3 main ranks being privates, sergeants and majors. In the later titles they all drop like flies however, with their rank mattering very little for their battle performance. Six. Officers in the older titles have 2 groups of troops that would actually follow them around as well as their bodyguards. The same goes for the player. They'd follow you around if you were playing as an officer who the developers had set as one of the default officers for that particular stage. Again, this was something that many players didn't notice, as it only happened if you picked an officer who was one of the stage's fixed officers, and the 2 groups of troops, they didn't park themselves right beside you while following. They kept a little bit of distance, as we see here in the footage. There's some other simulation aspects not mentioned here that were specific to certain games in the series, but those mentioned were the most common or prominent. It's worth bearing in mind that all of these features designed to simulate the real-time battles in Dynasty Warriors were happening on early PS2 hardware, and that's exactly why I claimed that these games were ahead of their time. In 2001, it's hard to think of many other games in that era that had you on the ground as a single soldier, with large armies clashing and great hack and slash gameplay, while also having these kind of dynamic battle simulations happening in real time. The closest were mostly in the strategy genre, like Kissin, or only available on more powerful PCs like the Total War franchise, but obviously those are pretty different types of games. So to give Dynasty Warriors some well-deserved credit, those early PS2 titles were pushing game design ideas and the hardware in ways that many people simply didn't notice. However, sadly the same can't be said about the later titles in the franchise. While you might logically expect the battle sim elements to be expanded and improved as new console hardware became available, the Dynasty Warriors games actually went in the opposite direction. As touched on earlier in the video, as the series progressed, some of the battle sim features were simplified or even outright removed from the gameplay formula. The franchise went from having sandboxy battlefields with some scripted events where you could largely do as you please, to being much more linear, objective-driven battlefields, where you're frequently given you goals, and if you personally don't go deal with them, then there's negative consequences or your army just doesn't progress much. This was an active design choice by the devs, as they tried to push the games in a more cinematic 1 vs 1000 gameplay style, but it came at the expense of the more detailed, dynamic battle simulation of the earlier games. This process was complete by the time of Dynasty Warriors 8, where things like the focus on more linear, objective-driven battles was combined with the removal of individual officer morale, the removal of named lieutenants fighting under the command of officers, the removal of officers' troop counts, and the removal of AI officers' KO counts boosting morale, amongst other battle sim simplifications. This contributed to the soft split that now exists within the player base, with one side of fans who don't care about the battle sim elements preferring the likes of Dynasty Warriors 8 because of its larger roster, smoother combat and better quality of life features, while the other side of the fan base still prefer the older PS2 era games because of the aggressive troops, more robust battlefield simulation and less objective driven stages, even if they lack the polish of the later games. You've probably noticed that not once have I mentioned the latest title in the series. Did it? No, not you. You don't exist. Just go away. Shoo. I am of course talking about Dynasty Warriors Origins. I waited until now because it neatly fits into this fanbase divide that I've just mentioned, as when the Origins director returned to the franchise having left after Dynasty Warriors 6, he had to make a choice. Does he continue the cinematic, objective-driven approach of the later games, or does he return to the more tactical, battle sim approach of the earlier games? Well, he made his choice, and he came down on the side of the earlier games. Gameplay-wise, Origins was essentially an overhaul of the entire formula, with both the hack and slash and the battle sim elements being reimagined with great results. To be clear, not everything that was lost in the later games was brought back in Origins, but instead it introduced new systems to the battle simulation, such as large forces forming for charges like we see here at Huliao Gate. Or bodyguard tactics, which can reduce enemy courage if used correctly. Large force grand tactics, which can deal great damage to enemy armies. And a courage system that increases the aggression and battle performance of officers, including their on-screen performance, represented by the chevrons beside their name. I'm not going to go into any more details about Origins here, as I do plan on covering it in another video about my hopes and design ideas for the potential future of the franchise and its formula in general. But that's it for now. I hope that I've been able to bring to light some of the obscured depth that these button mashers once had for their time, depth that was frequently overlooked. As mentioned, I'll have more to say about Dynasty Warriors in the future, so if you find this video informative and enjoy the franchise, then feel free to stick around. And remember,
you are a true warrior of the Three Kingdoms.